Hi, Himanshu. Welcome to day 1000.
Hey, hi Kavan, how are you doing?
I am fantastic. So excited to talk to you. You've gone to a tier one college in India. You've worked with an MNC, shifted countries to be, I think, in one of the best cities in the world, and have been running a company for over 7 years. I believe you've raised several $1 million as well from top notch venture capitalists. So a lot of people would be envying you, would want to be in your shoes. The idea is to use this conversation today to try and help those folks, help people who are building in your category to learn from your insights from the first 1,000 days of running a company, which, as you know, is the most thrilling but also the most painful 1,000 days you'd probably ever live. So before we get started with all of that, why don't you quickly introduce yourself and what your company does, please?
Sure. So I'm Himanshu. I'm the co-founder of AI Palette. At AI Palette, we are working at the intersection of AI, consumer insights, and FMCG industry, where we help our customers specifically to understand the trends in the market and then build the product concepts out of them, which they can then launch in the market. In terms of the ROI, the value that we bring to the table is we are cutting down the time of new product development, which typically would take 1 to 2 years, down to weeks and months. And at the same time, we are also increasing the success rate of the new product launches.
Incredible. And what's the scale you folks are at right now?
Yeah. So currently we are at a scale of 1 to 5 million ARR in terms of the revenue. And we are working with some of the biggest companies in the world when it comes to the CPG industry. So for example, we have Nestle, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola as our customers. And we are working with customers across 27 different geographies in 6 different continents. And I'm extremely proud of that because I myself have not visited those 27 geographies. So that's really amazing.
Kudos to you and the team.
Yeah.
I think bagging such big names is always hard,
Yeah.
especially on a technology platform. So let's take you back 7 8 years ago when you were probably very new. You've just launched your product and your company, and you're trying to get your first customers. Enterprise B2B is quite challenging. There is a lot of trust which is not there, and in B2B people buy from people they trust. So
Yeah.
if you're somebody who has come up with a product with no evidence, no past testimonials, right, how do you really create that trust? So take us back to how you got your first customers.
Yeah. So interestingly, for the first customer, I still remember, how the journey went. So we had actually reached out to more than 100 potential customers on LinkedIn, right? And again, using some hook or the other, right? It wasn't just a random message, but more of a personalized message. And one of them actually ended up responding to the message and said that, okay, let's meet up for a coffee. Although the other 90 said no, because they did not want to, even talk about anything related to a startup or a AI for that matter. But fortunately, this particular customer said yes, and we met for a coffee. And I think the interesting bit there is that we did not started focusing on the product. We started with a vision in the meeting. So we actually talked about where this company would be in 5 years and 10 years down the line, and what is the vision that we want to build. And I think that sort of struck a chord with this potential customer. And so much so that he ended up becoming one of the initial pilot customers for us, and also ended up becoming an angel investor. So that was something which was really exciting, that he's not just becoming a customer but also happy to come on board and become a part of our journey as an angel investor. So I think that was one of the ways in which we got a first customer. Again, I would say it's a story which is more about hustle and determination, because we were just reaching out to people. We did not have a lot of network, so to speak. And it was sort of maximizing the surface area of where we could reach out, and finally we could land into.
Amazing. I think there's so much evidence that cold outreach is a boon, right? It's cheap, it has poor
Yeah.
conversion rates, but if you're genuinely selling something unique and have an interesting way to put it out there, you will hear from some people. But still, you got your initial customer and you got the ball rolling. But I'm sure in your year two or year three,
Yeah.
this may not be very scalable, right? So, what were the other channels you used right after that first few DMs you sent?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things that worked out really well for us. One was the conference. And when I say conference, I don't mean every single conference in the world, but rather a targeted conference approach. knowing exactly where our ICP customers are going to be. So, for example, because we are in the FMCG food and beverage industry, we went after specific food conferences. For example, the Dairy Innovation Strategy, which happens in Amsterdam, or whether it is in Singapore, where you have Asia Pacific Food Conference. All of those kind of conferences is what we targeted. And one of the important pointers about attending a conference was that we don't just take up a booth, which we realized was a big mistake in the beginning, but rather become a keynote speaker and have a presence at the stage. Because what we realized is when you're speaking and talking about your vision at a keynote speech, then the kind of pipeline that you can build is much more than compared to, let's say, if you're having a booth, right? Because as a booth, you only become a vendor. As a keynote speaker, you actually become more of a influencer in a way, right? Where you are become like a product evangelist and you talk about your vision. So I think that was one of the ways in which we were able to crack some of our customers. Another thing which we started focusing very early on was a thought leadership. And this is again very important because we were more into a category creation. But the AI in the innovation and the customer intelligence, it did not exist as a proper matured category. So we had to invest a lot in evangelizing this category and talking about it more and more. And I think the wonderful part about it is that once we started building it, it has a compounding effect. So while the initial write ups did not garner much eyeballs, but once it built a great library and we also built out a great brand, I think then people started reaching out to us in inbound, right? And that's the power of the thought leadership, that we established ourselves as this AI leader in the CPG industry. And that definitely became one of our inbound channel and became a very strong channel for the conversions and whatnot. And also the qualification used to be much, much stronger in these cases. And I think the third was more around like, the referral part of it, which is with the existing customer. Because as you can imagine, the customers that we work with, their scale is across multiple geographies, multiple categories. And when we would start working with someone in, let's say, Singapore or in Malaysia market, they would typically talk to their Thailand or Vietnam counterparts, and then they would refer that, hey, we are using this new AI tool and it is helping me. So why don't you give it a try? And once we would capture the Asia part of it, then we would get referred to the Europe. And from Europe, we would then get referred to North America, Latin America, and so on and so forth. So the sole reason why we have been able to scale to 6 continents is also because of this land and expand motion. Because once we started proving our value in one category, one country, we were able to expand to multiple based on the word of mouth and the reference. So I think that's the other thing which has worked out well for us. And I would say it's also very underrated in that sense because not a lot of people think about the referral. But trust me, it's very, very strong because your sales cycle also are very shorter once it comes via in-house referral. So these were the three things that worked really well for us.
Lovely. I think really pointed advice here. I think often people see themselves sponsoring events and having stalls, but the real presence, I think, is a key learning for anybody tuning in. As somebody's also experienced that, I think I fully endorse, what you say here. But now jump into the second part. There's always pressure to grow, right? You want to be a fast growing company. That's where investors to our customers will look at you. If the entire objective is to grow fast, you end up also making some spends you regret. Every founder I've spoken to regrets some spends they have made, some calls they've taken they wish they had not. Any spends you regret in your first 1,000 days?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are multiple, to be very honest. But I think if I were to specifically point to something, it would be the spend that we made on hiring a VP of sales in the US market. Now, again, I mean, as everyone knows, US is the biggest B2B SaaS market, and everyone wants to capture a piece of that pie, right? And sometimes because of the pressure, so to speak, a quote unquote investor pressure, you end up going for very aggressive growth, right? Which means that you end up hiring the salespeople, the sales team, and anyone and everyone for that matter. So of course, for us also, while we were expanding and growing good in the APAC market, and also we have started seeing some growth in the EMEA market, we did get this pressure to start focusing on the US as a whole. And then one of the approach, obviously, in the hindsight, that would have been better would have been if one of the founders would have shifted there and then started the US outreach. But in our case, because of some personal reasons, we could not. And we ended up hiring a VP of sales instead. And that became like a very big mistake, because at the end of the day, there was a time zone difference. And even though my co-founder was traveling to US and like, sort of ramping up the VP of sale, it became very, very difficult to like, sort of align and work with them. And also the pressure was there, right? Because the ramping up while was happening, the US as a market has already had a competitor that we had, right? So it was becoming very difficult in terms of being able to prove our USP and our value. And also the product we had to regionalize in terms of the nuances of the US. For example, US as a whole is such a big country that you need to have regional level analytics. And we did not have that. While it was not needed so much in the Asia and the Euro, but the US definitely demanded that. So I think those were the things which we did not anticipate, so to speak, or we did not do well. So we definitely learned from our mistakes. We hired the sales executives and the people who would travel to US to the different conferences, the relevant conferences, and then started converting those leads. So that has worked out really well for us. And I think now it is one of the largest geographies from where we get our revenue.
I have often heard, I think hiring senior people at the wrong time is a huge mistake. There's obviously a relationship issue which comes up, there's a revenue loss which you see. And that's why I think it's very tempting to throw some money at a problem and say, hey, we'll hire some hoity toity person who will do sales. And you realize that the organization is immature sometimes to actually, absorb such people. But I want to ask, you're in multiple geographies. You said you cracked USA. What do you think worked? Because theoretically, a VP who knows and has relationships on ground should be more effective than a sales rep. So, any insight, like if let's say I'm a SaaS company, want to have, I want to be selling to USA, Europe. What's the right approach for me to do that?
Yeah. So let me talk about what worked specifically in our case and how did we change our approach. So initially, while we were there in the US, when we initiated in the US, we were targeting every company. However, when we relooked at the strategy, we started going via referral first. What that meant is we went for the companies whom we were already working in Asia and Europe, and we had proven the value, right? Now, once we had done that, that the US conversion became easier for those customers. And once we had that, then we had the initial pool of US customers, then we could go after only US customers. So I think that was one of the changes that we did in the approach. We went first with a referral from the Asia and the Europe customers. And once we had maybe a small sample set, which we could then use as case studies and references, then we started going after US focused customers or US only customers. So that definitely helped a lot.
What I hear is build evidence first, build credibility first, and then it's far easier for you to sell without having much. I think US is a hard market because there's always options. There's always people who've done it before. There are always people who claim that, you know, there's so much which has already happened. The last part of our, conversation now comes into overrated and underrated channels. Channels of customer acquisition are always subjective. You have to try, you have to burn your hands and realize what's working for you. Could you tell us for you, which has been your most underrated channel and what has been your most overrated channel?
Got it. I would say definitely the thought leadership. We did not expect that it is going to contribute so much when it comes to the inbound leads, right? Initially, we just wanted to build presence, but then we never looked at it as a channel which can result in revenue conversion and also become one of the dominant channels in revenue conversion. So definitely thought leadership, and especially in today's AI world where everyone is talking about AI, right? Now, agentic AI is all over the place. Everyone is talking about it. So how do you stand out with your content? And by the way, thought leadership should not be looked as only a content strategy. It should be about how you are able to portray your vision and how you are able to talk the domain language to the potential customers that are out there, right? So it goes beyond the content, and it's a
Could
holistic.
you unpack that a little bit more, please, Himanshu? When you say thought leadership, can you give some specific examples so people understand what you did?
Yeah. So, for example, in case of thought leadership, right, we always started with a vision of how the industry would look like 5 years from now, right? So, for example, let's say today it takes anywhere from 1 to 2 years for a brand manager to launch a product and then get that product from an idea to the launch and distribution, right? We said that in an AI first world, this is not going to be the case. This particular time window, which is of 1 to 2 years, will come down drastically. It will come down to weeks and months. And secondly, it will also become very personalized. It will become hyper personalized because consumer preferences are changing very, very fast. Now, what the coffee brand that you may like or you may like for that matter will be very, very different. compared to, let's say, our fathers, right? Or or the grandfathers who used to prefer only one flavor of coffee, right? So I think that's where the industry is going, and AI is only going to amplify it. And that is the vision that we would start. And I think it started resonating with a lot of people that yes, this AI, the hyper personalization and the reduction of the time is the need of the hour. And then AI seems like a possible way in which it can be solved. I think definitely one thing which helped us is also the timing, because we started a company in 2018, and this is when BERT, which was sort of a grandfather of LLMs, you can call it, was built out in the market. And slowly over a period of time, you had the GPT, and then followed by the Chat GPT and whatnot, right? So the timing also matters a lot. Today, if we are doing, we would have to do it a little differently. But at that point of time, the AI and the LLMs and the NLP definitely resonated a lot with the customers in the way that we were building. And once we had done that, then we could also see and start moving piece by piece, right? So when the generative AI wave started coming in the 2020 and 2021, we started going into the packaging design, because that is again one of the areas which can be disrupted. So in that way, looking at which are the technologies which are in nascent stage and how can they disrupt is how we started portraying our messaging, and not focusing on just the product features that hey, we are better than this product in so and so. So I think the content strategy has to focus more on the vision of how the world will look like 5 years or 10 years different from today. And that is what makes the thought leadership again an art and not just a science. So
I have a follow up question for you.
sure.
Brilliant framework, right? Think of the future, build the future, and talk about it. But so many people write with a lot of heart and passion this content and make it, and it gets 2 likes. And they get so discouraged. They're like, yeah, though he like Milai, I'm so upset. This is not worth my time. And they give up. So, can you talk about the distribution here?
Hmm. Got it. So I think the distribution that has worked out well for us has been so one is obviously when we went to those conferences and became a keynote speaker, then we were able to directly get the eyeballs of our prospective audience, right? Which is very, very important, because at the end of the day, the 1,000 prospective and targeted ICP audience is much better compared to, let's say, million of views which don't matter for you, right? Or the ICP which are outside of your ICP. So definitely that was one of the ways in which we did it. And I think the LinkedIn also worked out really well for us, because a lot of our customers are there on LinkedIn, and they are talking about whether it is the different conferences or they are talking about the different research reports that are out there. So that also became one of the other channel. And apart from it, one thing we started doing differently in the US market is that we started having some of these close dinners, right? Where you would have 10 to 15 or 10 to 20 members, where you would bring together people from different sort of companies and have them in a intimate dinner, where you would then make it not too formal, but at the same time make it more casual, but try to understand their perspectives and try to push through your vision in such a way that it doesn't look to seem like a push through, right? So I think those were a couple of ways in which we tried experimenting, and that also worked out really well for us, because then it became more of going beyond a regular office pitch to more about like people just talking about it, right? And talking about what the future could be.
I think that's where you to differentiate thought leadership. People often think it's writing LinkedIn posts, but it's so much more deeper. Now, tell me about your most overrated channel, something which we thought will work but never worked.
Yeah. So I think to be very honest, one thing which has not worked out well for us is, and there are again two parts to this. So one is just adding more salespeople does not work, and I think we also saw that just hiring the salespeople who are best from very proven companies also does not work, because typically when you're doing a category creation, if you hire someone who is a sales leader at a Salesforce, as an example, now, Salesforce has a big brand name already, right? So the person will obviously be able to benchmark and use that brand name to sell. But once they join AI Palette or any other smaller startup, the brand is not there. So they will not be able to easily sell. So ideally, you should look for the salespeople who don't have come from a great logo. Look for the people who have come from unknown logo but have been able to sell, right? Because then those are the right people for you, especially you are building in the 0 to 1 journey or the 10 journey. Of course, once you have built a brand, then you can hire from those scalable startups. So that was, I think, one of the learning. And I think the second one was about the conferences, where we would initially end up buying a booth. We invested a lot in terms of having a great booth and space and all that. And it also used to be great, right, in terms of marketing and also in terms of bragging rights that, hey, we got the largest booth at this particular conference. But I think what we realized is the booth restricts you in a way because you are bound to that particular area, the square feet of the area, and you cannot move around too much. Compared to that, if you're just going as an attendee, you can go anywhere in the conference, right, without worrying too much where your booth is. So I think that is another learning which we realized after a couple of years, and then we stopped doing and buying any booth and just focused on the keynote speeches and getting the entry passes. So these are the two
Lovely.
I would say which we felt on the overrated side.
Lovely. No, I think these two often come across as one of the first top of mind things to do when you have money, right? And I think it's so nice and wise of you to share these insights. So that marks the three questions, and we're at the end of our conversation. Himanshu, I always ask this as a parting thought. The hardest part about your first 1,000 days is getting through them, right? You struggle, it's a chaotic time. So, how is it that, what's your advice to, founders who are probably struggling to, be resilient?
Yeah, so there's a line in the Bhagavad Gita which definitely has struck a chord with me, and it continues to inspire me, which is ki chinta mat karo. And I think it's all about striving and focusing on what is in your control. That's my takeaway from that line, that you can only do what is within your control, which is taking the action and focusing on your actions and doing the hard work, right? Now the results are a function of that, but then they are also a function of everything else that is outside of your control, right? I mean, let's say you were building in the shipping industry and now this World War III has happened, right? That is outside of your control. You can't do anything, but you can only do some action. Maybe you can try to think of an alternative way in which you could, sort of solve that problem. So I think it's all about taking those actions and striving through it. I know it's a little banal, but at the same time, I think it's very underrated also if you think about a deeper meaning, because a lot of founders I've seen, they give up after a point of time, right? They feel that, hey, this is too much struggle and we should not do it. I think obviously you have to look at if the things are working and not working, and keep on pivoting also your experiments and see what is working and then doubling down on that, right, rather than just doing what is not working and continuing on it. So the actions also have to be smarter, and I think it's just about that, right? And to be honest, at the end of the day, the success of a startup is a factor of multiple things, right? You cannot just attribute it only to founder. It's also the timing. It's also about, n number of things which are outside of your control. So just focus on the things in your control and continue at it. And I would say also enjoy the journey in the process. If you're not enjoying the journey, then you will not be able to get through, because it's a long journey. You should set aside at least 5 to 10 years of your life, which is a substantial time if you think about it. So enjoy the journey also, and the results will come, automatically.
Fantastic, fantastic. This reminds me of what I think Naval Ravikant said, which is be impatient with your input, but patient with your outcomes. So
Oh yes.
keep on trying. Be very impatient with your tries, but be very patient with your outcome, because it may take a decade for something you did years ago to actually shine. So brilliant note to end the podcast on. I hope you had a good time, Himanshu.
Yes, definitely I did. I hope you also had a good time.
Absolutely. And for everybody who's stuck along, thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like another founder here, please subscribe to our channels, and a new episode will come out very, very soon. Bye bye.
Thank you, Kavan. Bye bye.